face and see. The King is coming. The King is coming. Praise God. He's coming for me. The King is coming. The King is coming. I just heard the trumpet sounding, and soon his face shall see. The King is coming. The King is coming. Praise God. He's coming. Thank y'all for helping me on that. I'm kind of hoarse this morning. I'd like to do a Father's Day song now. That y'all remember a cowboy named Gene Autry? Canada? That used to be my hero. If we played cowboys, I always got to be Gene Autry. My brother would be Roy Rogers. But anyway, Gene wrote this song. He and another guy, I can't remember his name right now, back in 1931. And it didn't do much good in 31 on up to 35. And then it took hold and it sold several million copies, I understand. So I was looking through my stuff and run across this one, and I thought, that sounds like a pretty good song for Father's Day. So here it is. The name of it is That Silver-Haired Daddy of Mine. You remember that? In a vine-covered shack in the mountains, bravely fighting the battle of time, is a dear one who's weathered life's sorrow, is that silver-haired daddy of mine. If I could recall all the heartache, dear old daddy, I caused you to bear. If I could erase those lines from your face and bring back the gold to your hair, if God would but grant me the power just to turn back the pages of time, I'd give all I own if I could but atone to that silver-haired daddy of mine. I know it's too late, dear old daddy, to repay for the sorrows and cares. Though dear mother is waiting in heaven just to comfort and solace you there. If I could recall all the heartache, dear old daddy, I caused you to bear. If I could erase those lines from your face and bring back the gold to your hair, if God would grant me the power just to turn back the pages of time. I'd give all I own if I could but atone to that silver-haired daddy of mine.
Thank you, Calvin.
Yes.
And thank you, Jesus.
Amen.
For dads, for moms, for families. The family was God's idea. And when we do family God's way, it works. Now, unfortunately, we're still sinners. And no, this is not a Father's Day message. This is just a preface. We're still sinners. Which means that despite our best efforts, we're not always going to do it God's way. Which means things will go wrong in families. It's part of being in a sinful world. It's part of being sinful creatures. And I want to remind all of you, because I have to remind myself sometimes. When you do have a child that maybe drifts, maybe lives a lifestyle you don't approve of, that you know is ungodly, you can't take it personally. It's not necessarily your failure. Now, it could be. But we always have to remember God's the perfect Father. And He put the first two humans in the garden, and they sinned and rebelled against Him, even though they had the privilege of walking with Him every evening. And if that's going to happen, then our kids can rebel and go against the way they've been brought up to. So just a message of comfort there before we dive into the rest of this. I promised you last week, and I'm holding to that promise. This is the last of the messages about the purpose-driven church. But it is important. It's part of the process. And as we go into those smaller group meetings on Sunday afternoons and maybe Wednesday evenings, hopefully soon, some of what we're talking about will come back. It's not necessarily that we're going to go over the whole thing again, but some of these principles we'll come back to. So that's where we're at. Now, we're going to talk about today applying your purposes. We've talked about discovering God's purpose for the church. We've talked about how to process that and who our target audience is and all those kinds of things. But now it's about applying your purpose. And it's rooted in 2 Thessalonians 3:4. 2 Thessalonians 3:4. Who wrote 2 Thessalonians? One of you out there knows. It's the Apostle Paul, writing to the church in a place called Thessalonica. And this is near the end of it. As he's, anytime a preacher preaches, if you will, he sort of at the end summarizes and starts in, even if it's not a formal invitation, but an encouragement to take action. So Paul says, 2 Thessalonians 3:4, we have confidence in the Lord about you. Okay? That you are doing and will continue to do what we command. So God is, through His Word and through our teachings that we have been studying, He is encouraging us that He has confidence. Because remember, when the writers of the Bible, including the Apostle Paul, when they're writing, and what has been preserved for us today is God's intention for us to receive that as His Word directly to us, as well as to them that Paul wrote it to originally. So he's expressing his confidence, God's confidence in his people, that we will do, that we have been doing, and we will continue to do the things that he has commanded us to do. So he's talking to true believers there. Okay? So that's just sort of an intro to that about applying your purposes. Now we're going to look at 10 ways to fit a purpose statement into purpose-driven action. Now we've not drafted our purpose statement yet. I think I've got one that we can start with and then build on, but that'll be when we get into the smaller group meetings, or not necessarily smaller, but outside of Sunday morning worship. Let's put it that way. So 10 ways. And here's the first way, is to assimilate new members on purpose. Mark chapter 12, verse 34. When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he's talking with someone, he says this. He says, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." Jesus himself recognized that people can come to saving faith and to discipling faith in stages. That it's not all at once. And we talked last week about the crowd, the congregation, the committed, the core, and then back into the community. So the community to the crowd to the congregation to the committed to the core, and back to the community. Now what does that look like for us? Well, at this point, you're my core. There may be a few others, but you're my core. You're the ones that are faithful here every week. You're the ones that support the church financially. Now, there may be some online that help support. I understand that too, but whether you're online watching or whether you're here physically in the building, you're my core. And the core has to do what? Reach into the community to the unchurched. And what is our community? Draw a small circle around this building. A few blocks. That's our core community. Now, do we want to reach people outside of that? Sure. Most of you live outside of this circle around the church building. But if we're serious about the call of Christ, this is our Jerusalem. Right here. And it makes no sense to give concentrated effort. Now, we accept and welcome anybody from anywhere. But it makes no sense to give our concentrated effort to other parts of Hugo and ignore this. So this area right here, from the train tracks to the Choctaw area, from the north end of town to at least the train tracks this way, that's our area. And we've got to concentrate on it. So our core needs to start thinking where this is our community to reach into. And our purpose in reaching into the community, yes, is to minister to them. Yes, is to hear them. Yes, is to meet some needs. But to bring the community to be part of the crowd. We talked about that last week. And then those that are in the crowd, that means they've started attending. They may not be Christians yet. They're just coming to hear. Remember Jesus said, come and see. So they come to see, come to hear what God is doing. And then from the crowd, they become part of the congregation. And it's a process. It may not happen all at once. Then from the congregation to those who are committed, membership, and becoming a disciple. And then from the committed into the part that I'm calling the core. So that's sort of a process. And so that's number one. We have to assimilate new members according to our purposes. Now, programming around our purposes. We're going to look at our target. What is our objective? The community, our objective is evangelism. Share the good news. Share the good news. There used to be a song, and it may still be in the hymnal, and of course at Falls Creek we would do like teenagers always do, and yes, I was a teenager once. But the song was "Tell the Good News." Well, that just slides right into GNU, like the animal, a GNU. So we would say "Tell the Good News." But our objective with our community is what? Tell the good news. There is hope in Jesus. Now, I'm not doing a whole sermon on it, but we're all aware of the COVID problem, and we're all aware of right now the racial and socio-economic strife that is all over our country. I'm here to tell you this morning that there is not a political solution. They're band-aids. There is not a human solution. Anything we do is a band-aid to the real problem. And the real problem is that they don't have the living hope of Jesus in their lives. Because if they did, all of this would be being approached differently. So our task with our community, another song I learned growing up, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Right? Our task in our community, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of race, regardless of prior religious experience, is to share the good news. That's our task with the community. That is our objective with that target. Now, the next group, when we get them into the crowd, we have to start teaching people how to worship. Now, there's not just one way to worship. Let's be sure about that. There's not just one way. There are cowboy churches, and they do a great job of it. There are contemporary churches that do a great job of it. Now, I'm not a smoke and mirrors and laser light show type guy, but musically, that's okay. There's traditional that may incorporate choirs and organs and all of that. There's all sorts of mixtures. Our African American friends, they have a whole different way in the churches that are predominantly African American. And none of those are right and none of those are wrong. It's just what works in that congregation. And over time, our patterns right here may change to fit our congregation. Now, I did learn some things, and I continue to learn some things. 62 years old, and I'm still learning. I hope that is true for all of us, that we're still learning. There is a great, great need for the church to share eternal truths and not just forward to the relevancy issue. But we bring people through evangelism to be a part of the crowd, even if they've not yet accepted Jesus. And once they're part of the crowd, we're going to teach everyone how to worship in spirit and truth. Then, as they become part of the congregation, that means they're here regularly, they're a part of us. Even if they've not made a decision for Christ yet, they're still a part of us. We bring them into fellowship, and that is where we're talking about commitment to Christ. Because you can't be a part of the true fellowship of believers unless you are a believer. So that's our target and objective there. Now, once they're in the fellowship, we're trying to transition to the committed, and that is discipleship. Teaching the deeper truths, going beyond just the wonderful blessing of salvation to what does this mean now for the rest of my life? And then moving some into the core, and that object there is for the core to start ministry, which again rolls right back up to the top to reach the community through evangelism. And it's just a cycle that all of us at one time have been through that cycle or are in that cycle somewhere. So programming around our purposes, that's number 2. But if we've got to answer a question, what if your church doesn't match your community? I served a church in Oklahoma City. I will not name it. We were predominantly, as far as the people who worshiped and attended and were the congregation and the fellowship and the discipling and the core, all of those folks lived nowhere near the church building. I mean, nowhere near the church building. We were in a near downtown area, an inner city type area, and everybody lived in the suburbs. Our church congregation did not match our community. In some ways, that's true here. And I don't say that in a disparaging manner toward any of you, but there's a reason you don't live here, because you don't really fit here as much as you might have at one time. Now, some of you do live in the area, and that's great. But overall, a lot of our church does not really connect to our community. So what do? We have to face that. 1, build on your strengths. What are some of our strengths? Got a fantastic facility. Now, that's not an all in all, but we do have a fantastic facility. This room is the last thing that hasn't been dealt with yet. And I know you were looking at that before some things happened in the past year about tearing out the carpet and putting in new flooring and changing the seating and all that. And that may come again. But regardless, we got a great facility. You and others have sacrificially given to make sure that that has happened. So that's a strength. We have some very committed people, both attendance-wise and financial support. I hear churches across our nation that are hurting financially because of the coronavirus, the COVID, whatever you want to call it. And I don't want you to quit giving. Don't misunderstand me, because you give out of your love for Jesus. But through this time period, our bank balance has strengthened instead of weakened. Now, it's not about bank balances, but it's an indicator of the committed nature of you. So that's a strength. The building, the strength of our committed core, not only in attendance, but in financial support. We've got a solid youth program. Now, does it need to get better and bigger? Absolutely. But those kids love Brittany. They come on Wednesday night. They pour out their hearts to her, and they hear her respond through God's Word. So that is a strength. That is a real strength. So we have some strengths. There are others. I just can't go into everything. But the point is, we can build on the good things that we have. We can also reinvent our congregation. What does that mean, Pastor? Some churches, and I'm not suggesting, this is not prescription, I'm not prescribing like a doctor would, I'm describing what has happened in some locations. Churches have reinvented themselves. They've said, okay, what does everybody in our community listen to on the radio? Well, then that's the kind of music we need to give them. Now, that may or may not be true, but I'm describing, okay? They've said, okay, maybe we all were wearing coat and tie and dresses and very fine clothing, and our community doesn't dress that way, so we need to tone it down a little bit so that they feel more comfortable being a part of us. We don't have that issue. I'm just describing what some churches have done. But they have taken a look at their community and changed not the message, but the method to reflect where they're at. So you can reinvent. You can also, and we're not anywhere near this ready, but you can also start new congregations, either additional worship services or actually planting other churches in the community to meet the needs. That can also mean like home Bible studies, that you find some people that are willing to have a Bible study in their home instead of coming to the church building, and you introduce people from the community to the crowd through the step of home Bible studies. So starting new congregations is a possibility. Right now, I think for us, we've got to focus on that first one, build on your strengths, and go from there. But we do have to face the fact that in some respects, we don't fit where God has planted us. Good enough? All right, we're moving on. Now this, I told you last week, we were going to come to the baseball diamond. You may not be able to see that real clearly. I don't think that that's bold enough there. But I'll talk you through it. It's a baseball diamond, and it helps with that process that we were talking about. Our first task with people is to try to bring them to a saving knowledge of Jesus. Now, we do that through that transition of community to crowd to congregation, and all of that. But our task is bringing people to a saving knowledge of Jesus. And that's what the first baseline, from home plate to first base, it says knowing Christ. So that is our first task, is for people to know Jesus. Not know about Jesus, not know who He is, but to know Jesus. And when they get to first base, that's a commitment to membership. Now, going along from first base to second base is growing in Christ. That's discipleship. And as they move along there, they're becoming committed to discipleship personally and corporately. So that second base is being committed to maturity. That I'm not going to let this process stop anywhere. I'm becoming committed. From second base toward third base is learning how to serve Christ. Not just being fed, not just being served yourself anymore, but learning how to serve. I'll never forget my first experience in church visitation. I was probably a sophomore in high school. And my pastor grabbed me after church one morning. Said, "Visitation's Tuesday night. I want you here, and you're going to go with me." Okay. And we only went to one home. He did all the talking. He said, "Your job is to pray for me and to see what I'm doing so that you can maybe prepare for the future." Calvin, if you go back that far, is David Hall.
Yeah.
And we went to see an elderly couple that were nominal church members, but pastor proclaimed Jesus to them. Because he didn't see maturity in their life. He didn't see discipleship in their life. All he saw was they come occasionally and their names on the church roll. And I wish I could tell you they made commitments to Jesus that night. They did not. But He gave me the example. And that's what I'm saying as far as learning to serve Christ. We have to take people under our wing and teach them what we already know about how to serve Jesus. And that's that. From second base to third base. By the time of third base, they're committed personally to ministry. They've learned a little bit and they say, I like this, I want to get involved. So they're moving there now from third base toward home. Home is not heaven in this analogy. Home is learning that process, though, of sharing Christ with people. Like the pastor took me out and taught me how to start sharing Jesus. From being committed to serving, we need to learn how to share Jesus with others and become committed to what? To missions. That's what home base is. Home plate is being committed to missions. And I'm not talking about foreign missions. I'm not talking about state missions. I'm talking about being committed to the mission and purpose of the church that God has given us. We have to educate our church on purpose and take them through that process. All right. Start small groups on purpose. Lord willing, over time, more people are going to come. And if we want to be serious about teaching the Bible, we're going to outgrow that one classroom back here, which means we're going to have to start classes. Well, this point is to start small groups, Sunday school groups, and other groups on purpose. With a purpose, not just willy-nilly, but to meet the needs of our community, to meet the needs of the crowd, to meet the needs of the congregation. We start more small groups. If we want to reach families, what do we got to have? We got to have Sunday school for children and preschoolers. We don't have any except for one coming right now. But God's not going to send us anybody if we're not ready to take care of them when they get here. So we have to, I'm not saying next week, I'm saying as this process moves forward, we have to start some small groups and be ready as we reach out into the community to teach and take care of those needs. Start small groups on purpose. Come on. Add staff on purpose. Churches, historically, don't think about their purposes so much when they add staff as what will make their lives more convenient. What do I mean by that? 100 years ago, churches did not have student pastors, youth pastors. They did not have administrators. They did not have all of these other things. They had a pastor and maybe a worship leader, worship pastor, if they were a big church. Otherwise, they had some willing person like Calvin that got up and helped. But along the way, a church added maybe a music and youth director. They combined that. We need to reach our teenagers and we need somebody to lead us in music, so we're going to make a combined role. And Church A did that. Church B looked over there and said, they've got that. Maybe that's what we need to do. Had nothing to do with a planned, programmed purpose of the church. It was, looks like it's working for them. Let's do that too. And using that pattern over the years, really large churches especially, but even middle-sized churches have gotten to where their staff needs are so big because it makes life more convenient for the membership in many cases. Whose job is it to visit folks that are sick and in the hospital and not coming to church? It's not the pastor's job. The pastor's job is to equip the people for the work of the ministry. It's the congregation's job. But a lot of churches will say, Pastor, that's your job, and if it becomes too big for you, we'll get us a pastor that just goes out and visits people. It's not really making an impact for the purpose of the church. It's making life more convenient for the church. And on and on and on. Instead, I'm proposing that we add staff on purpose, according to the purposes of our church. So, as we grow and God leads us, we need to constantly keep in front of us the purpose of the church when we think about staff members and staff personnel. Instead of copying what other churches are doing, we need to use our purpose statement and our purposes to drive who the staff needs to be. No, we're not firing Brittany. I'm talking about long-range stuff that we need to learn. We need to structure the church on purpose. What do I mean by that? And this is going to look backwards at first, but then we're going to drive it the other direction. First, the team, the task, or the target. You start with the target. Then what does the task need? Well, another target. So it starts with the target, goes to what is the task needed to be done, then we get a team to deal with it. So, that's moving on from there. We're getting close to the end. One slide is going to capture it all now. Preaching on purpose. What does that mean? I know pastors, and I'm not being critical of them. That's the style, that's the way God made them. But they're still worried on Saturday night what they're going to preach on Sunday morning. That's very stressful to the pastor. That's stressful to the teamwork of the staff. When you have a music minister that's able to work with the pastor all the time, if the pastor knows where he's going, then the musicians can work and supplement that and augment that. Preaching on purpose means that you're not just bouncing here and there, but you've got a reason and a plan for your preaching. I told you last week, and I'm going to remind you this week, that yes, Brother Steve's going to be here next week, but the following week, July 5th, we are starting in the book of Philippians. And we're going to go, it's probably going to take 12 or 13 weeks to get through the book of Philippians. I know where I'm going. I know why I'm going. And if Calvin or Mark or anyone else wants to plan their music around that, all they've got to do is know this is where we're going to be next week in the Scripture. And Sunday school teaching with preaching, then the Sunday school teachers would know, oh, this is where the pastor's going. And even though our Scripture and stuff in the Bible study, in the quarterly, may not be exactly the same, I still know what he's doing, so I can weave those two together. So preaching on purpose, not just bouncing around like a leaf in the wind and all of that. Budgeting on purpose. Two things eat up most of every church's budget. Staff and buildings. Staff and buildings. Well, if you staff on purpose, then you can fix part of that as far as the budget goes. but budgeting on purpose, which means you start with why do we exist? What are the targets? What are the programs to reach those targets? And then you build a budget around that, as opposed to, well, we spent this much here last year, we'll add 3% and call that a budget for next year. That's craziness. We need to budget on purpose. We need to calendar on purpose. We talked early in this series about some churches are event driven. They go from event to event to event to event. What I mean by that? Well, just in a normal spring, you've got Valentine's Day, you've got spring break, you've got Easter, you've got Mother's Day, you've got Memorial Day, you've got Father's Day, you've got 4th of July. Then you're rolling right around to Labor Day. And all those are good holidays and everything, but they build events around those holidays, or they build other events, and the calendar is driven by events instead of the purpose of the church driving the events, which then drives the calendar. So we calendar, we plan things according to our purposes as a church. And then finally we evaluate on purpose. Now again, what is that about? I don't think we need to just roll around every year. We need to look at, all right, we came to a common agreement that this is our purpose, right? We haven't yet, but just hang with me. We've come to a common agreement in the church that this is our purpose. We have structured everything on purpose. We're preaching on purpose. We're calendaring on purpose. Sometime annually, at least annually, maybe more often, we need to sit down, key leadership, and say, are we accomplishing our purposes with what we're doing? Or do we need to adjust? We evaluate according to purposes. All of that leads to this last slide. Once again, the purpose-driven church means growth without compromising message or mission. I promise you, this is the last one of these. So let's wrap it up with next steps. When we're able to do our, I don't want to say small groups again, alternate groups outside of Sunday morning worship. When we're able to get together and do those again, we're going to be working on purpose. Why has God put Clayton Avenue Baptist Church physically and spiritually and all of that right here? Why? What is our purpose? I'm not talking about 100 and plus years ago, 1911. Right now, why is this church here? Once we discover, we don't invent, we discover God's purpose for the church, then we start all of this other stuff. And those are things we will agree to together. I will never dictate to you what to do. I will encourage you and bring you along with me, or I will see the wisdom in you and I will go with you. But we will go together wherever we go until God is continue what He's doing. I thank you so much for the patience with this. If you're at home and you're hearing this, there's not a lot of gospel message in it, but I want you to know Jesus loves you. He loves you so much that He came to this earth and became a human being while still being God. Lived His life without any of the sins, the mistakes, the faults, the failures that you and I do. And in that process, He irritated enough people that they took Him to a place called Golgotha. They nailed Him to rough wooden beams, hung Him in the air, killed Him. Now, their purpose in killing Him was just to get rid of a rabble-rouser, somebody they were afraid of. But God's purpose in his death was that his death would be a sacrifice on our behalf to remove the stain of sin. And 3 days after he died, out of his own being as God, he came out of that grave so that you and I could not just have forgiveness of sin, but that we could have an abundant, victorious life right here on this earth. If you're hearing that for the very first time, I invite you to message us on Facebook. We have a website, claytonavenue.org, has a place there for prayer requests. You can send us a message through that. But let us know if you need to talk to somebody. If you're here today in the building and you need to talk with me, I'll be at the back when service is over, and we'll take as much time as you need. All right. As I said, Brother Steve will be with us next week. Be sure and let people know. Get here yourself and have a great time of worship. Mark Bays will be